The dense, swampy air hung heavy beneath them, unlike anything they had experienced before. As the craft settled onto the marshy ground, a faint ripple disturbed the still waters around it, sending frogs leaping into the shadows and birds fluttering deeper into the trees. The aliens, born on a planet of calm weather and stable environments, had chosen this remote Louisiana bayou to establish a foothold on Earth, confident in their superiority over anything that inhabited this planet. Inside the craft, Commander Threll scanned the immediate surroundings. Thick, rotting vegetation stretched out in every direction, the air teeming with life. The buzz of insects, the distant calls of unseen creatures. Primitive, he muttered in his guttural tongue, feeling both repulsed and secure in their technological advantage. His soldiers, outfitted in smooth exosuits and wielding advanced energy rifles, stood ready, awaiting the order to deploy. Their mission was simple: subjugate the area, establish a base, and move on. They expected minimal resistance from both the land and the humans. The swamp, however, had other plans. As the Clarens began unloading equipment, their sleek machines hummed to life. Portable drones, hovering quietly, began mapping the area, and sensors embedded in the mud detected every movement. But almost immediately, problems arose. The first drone, sent out to survey the surrounding marsh, faltered in midair, its stabilizer struggling against the thick humidity. A second drone soon followed, only to have its sensors clogged by tiny, almost invisible insects. The swamp was fighting back, and the Clarens, so accustomed to control, were beginning to lose it. Commander Threll barked in order to recalibrate the machines, but the problems only compounded. Moisture seeped into their delicate electronics, causing malfunctions in systems that were supposed to be foolproof. What the Clarens saw as minor inconveniences, however, would soon become far more dangerous. The thick swamp mud clung to their boots, making movements slow and labored. As they pressed further into the dense foliage, Threll's irritation grew. "Nothing but dirt and insects," he growled, unaware of how deadly this place could become. Miles away, deeper in the bayou, a group of Cajun men sat in a small, weather-beaten shack, huddled around a lantern. The soft murmur of their voices mixed with the nighttime symphony of the swamp. Jack, the eldest of the group, leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the wooden table. He had lived in the swamp his entire life, and tonight, something felt off. "Anyone else see them strange lights out past the cypress trees last night?" he asked, his voice low but steady. The other men, a rough group of hunters and fishers, glanced at each other. They'd seen them too. Bright flashes, like lightning but without thunder, had lit up the sky just before dawn. Strange for sure, but in the bayou, strange was a way of life. "Could be nothing. Could be something," Jack continued. "Either way, ain't natural. Something's out there." Henry, a younger man but tough from years of surviving the swamp, nodded. "Reckon we should go take a look." Jack didn't respond immediately. He stared out the window at the inky blackness of the swamp. This land was his. He knew every tree, every twist of the water. Whatever was out there didn't belong. "We go at first light," he finally said, his tone brooking no argument. The group agreed, exchanging wary looks. They weren't afraid, but they respected the swamp and its dangers. As the lantern flickered, they couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural had come to disturb the delicate balance of their world. Back at the Claren camp, the situation worsened. The aliens were not used to the swamp's merciless humidity, and their advanced tech began to falter. Communication systems crackled with interference, and the damp air corroded the metal of their equipment faster than expected. Threll ordered his soldiers to push forward, but even their finely tuned exosuits struggled against the sucking mud, which clung to their feet like tar. The longer they stayed, the more the swamp seemed to resist their presence. Nightfall brought no relief. As the Clarens attempted to set up camp, they became aware of the living, breathing force that surrounded them. The constant hum of insects grew louder. Swarms of mosquitoes clung to their suits, and the oppressive heat showed no sign of lifting. Unseen eyes watched them from the water. The slow drift of an alligator, the subtle movement of snakes in the brush. The Clarins were in the middle of a world they didn't understand, and with each passing hour, that world seemed more hostile. Threll, ever confident, clenched his fist as he stared into the impenetrable darkness. "We will bend this place to our will," he snarled, oblivious to the swamp's quiet, patient wrath. Little did he know, the land had already begun its counterattack. By dawn, the swamp was a thick mist, the air saturated with the kind of humidity that clung to everything and everyone. Jack and his group moved quietly through the underbrush, their boots barely making a sound on the soft, wet ground. Armed with shotguns and knives, the men were on edge but calm, their movements practiced and deliberate. Years of living in the bayou had made them as much a part of the land as the trees and the water. They didn't need to speak. Every man knew his role. "Stay low," Jack whispered, crouching behind a cypress tree, his eyes scanning the distant horizon. They had followed the strange lights and sounds deep into the heart of the swamp, farther than any of them had gone before. And now, in the murky distance, they saw it. An alien structure half hidden by the foliage, a shimmering metal base that didn't belong in the ancient, muddy waters of Louisiana. Henry, crouched beside Jack, exhaled slowly. "That ain't nothing we've ever seen," he muttered. "No," Jack replied, his voice tight. "But whatever it is, it ain't friendly." The men studied the scene before them. The Clarins, tall and spindly in their exosuits, moved stiffly around their camp, setting up equipment that blinked and whirred in the thick air. But even from their hidden vantage point, the locals could see the aliens struggling. The invaders moved slowly, weighed down by the mud and the humidity. Jack smiled grimly. They were in over their heads. "We ain't got their firepower," said Henry, eyes narrowing. "But this is our swamp. We don't need no fancy gear." Jack nodded. "We hit 'em hard, then fall back. Let the swamp do the rest." And so, the battle began, not with a loud assault, but with a series of careful, calculated strikes. The locals moved like ghosts through the dense vegetation, setting traps, disturbing the ground, guiding the invaders deeper into the most treacherous parts of the swamp. Henry took the first shot, his old shotgun cracking through the early morning quiet. It wasn't aimed to kill, just to test. The shot hit a nearby tree, sending the Clarins into immediate action. Commander Threll, always on edge, barked orders in his guttural alien tongue. His soldiers raised their rifles, scanning the thick undergrowth for signs of the attackers. But there was nothing, only the rustle of leaves, the sound of water shifting beneath the surface. The swamp swallowed the noise, making it impossible for the aliens to tell where the humans were. A second shot rang out, this time hitting one of the Clarin drones. The small device sputtered in midair, its sensors shorting out in the damp conditions. It dropped into the mud with a dull thud, its lights flickering briefly before going dark. Frustration built within the Clarin ranks as more drones failed, their technology betraying them in the unforgiving environment. The locals struck again, this time using the swamp's natural predators to their advantage. Jack had guided the Clarins toward a stretch of water thick with alligators. The massive reptiles, drawn to the commotion, silently circled the invaders, their cold, unblinking eyes just above the surface. One of the aliens, stepping too close to the edge, was yanked underwater in an explosion of water and teeth, his energy rifle falling uselessly into the muck. Commander Threll cursed loudly, his anger mounting. "Deploy more drones," he shouted, but it was no use. The swamp was their enemy now, its dense foliage and murky waters, turning their advanced technology into liabilities. The exosuits, designed for more predictable terrains, struggled with the swamp's sucking mud and hidden roots. With every step, the Clarins sank deeper, their movements growing more sluggish and desperate. Meanwhile, the locals moved like shadows. They knew the rhythms of the bayou, where to step and when to hide. Jack, Henry, and the others picked off the aliens one by one, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. Their attacks were precise, crippling but not killing, each strike designed to disorient and frustrate. The Clarins, now panicking, attempted to regroup, but the swamp offered them no sanctuary. Henry and another hunter led them toward an area of quicksand, its surface deceptive and calm. Two Clarins, unaware, plunged forward and were immediately sucked into the ground. Their suits, designed to resist harsh planetary climates, were no match for the treacherous Earth. They struggled, arms flailing, but the more they fought, the faster they sank. Within minutes, they were gone, consumed by the land they had sought to conquer. As the sun climbed higher, the Clarins' numbers dwindled. The once confident invaders were now broken, their advanced weapons useless in the face of the swamp's unrelenting assault. Commander Threll, his pride wounded, called for a retreat, but the swamp had already sealed their fate. A final ambush from Jack's group, quick, silent, and deadly, cut off their escape, leaving the surviving Clarins trapped in the heart of the bayou. By midday, the swamp had claimed most of the invaders, their bodies disappearing into the murky waters and thick mud. The locals stood victorious but somber, knowing that the swamp itself had done the heaviest lifting. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and turned to Henry. "This ain't over yet," he muttered, "but they're learning real fast. This swamp don't belong to no one but itself." Henry nodded, scanning the quiet waters. The battle might have been won, but they both knew that the swamp, like any good ally, wasn't finished with its work yet. Commander Threll stood at the edge of the camp, his alien eyes scanning the horizon, the swamp around him thick with a stillness that felt more like a noose tightening than a moment of peace. His soldiers, once a powerful unit armed with superior technology, were now scattered and struggling. Half of his forces had already fallen, victims of either the relentless locals or the swamp itself, which seemed determined to consume them. His body ached under the weight of the exosuit that was now more burden than protection, its joints clogged with mud, its power reserves drained by the oppressive moisture. Around him, the remaining Clarins were equally strained. Their movements were labored, their alien weapons malfunctioning in the humidity, and their once sleek suits covered in grime. They had vastly underestimated this planet, this swamp, and now it was too late to admit their mistake. Threll's pride wouldn't allow it. He still believed he could salvage the mission, though doubt gnawed at him with each passing hour. "We can't stay here," one of his officers said in their sharp, guttural language. His voice trembled, an unusual show of fear from the usually stoic Clarins. "The equipment, it's failing. We need to get out before—" "Before what?" Threll interrupted, glaring. "Run from these primitives? From the insects and mud? We are Clarin. We will not retreat." But even as he spoke, he knew it was bravado. The swamp was killing them as surely as any enemy ever had. The officer said nothing more. Around them, the sounds of the swamp were alive with menace. The hum of mosquitoes, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the thick underbrush. The humans, like phantoms, had disappeared into the fog once more, leaving the Clarins alone to battle the elements. But it wasn't the humans that terrified Threll. It was the swamp itself. It was everywhere, in everything, beneath his feet in the air, and seeping into the very essence of his once formidable troops. Hours passed in oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional crack of a twig or the splash of something moving in the water. Threll's soldiers huddled together, their once bright armor dulled by the muck, eyes darting nervously at the shifting shadows around them. The humans knew this land too well. They were using it as a weapon, one that Threll could neither see nor understand. Suddenly, a sharp cry split the air, a Clarin soldier being dragged down into the water by something large and unseen. The surface churned violently, then stilled. Panic rippled through the remaining soldiers as they raised their weapons, scanning the water for signs of movement. But there was nothing, only the cold, watchful eyes of the swamp. "Form up," Threll commanded. Though his voice lacked its usual authority, his soldiers complied, but the fear was palpable. They had been worn down by the relentless conditions, their numbers dwindling as the swamp picked them off one by one. As if on cue, the humans reappeared, this time in force. Jack and Henry led the charge, emerging from the thick fog like vengeful spirits. They moved quickly, efficiently, firing their shotguns and setting off traps that sent the remaining Clarens scrambling. The aliens fired back, but their rifles, choked with moisture and mud, sputtered uselessly. A Claren near Threll tried to engage his suit's energy shield, but the system failed. The soldier barely had time to react before Jack's knife slashed through the air, cutting the alien down with brutal efficiency. Around them, more Clarens fell, pulled under by the swamp or taken down by the hunter's practice shots. Commander Threll fought to maintain control, but the humans were everywhere, darting in and out of the mist, attacking and vanishing just as quickly. His heart pounded as he realized, for the first time in his long career, that he was losing. No! Not just losing. He was defeated. The retreat he had once scorned became his only option. "Fall back!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. The few remaining Clarens obeyed, retreating deeper into the swamp, hoping to find safety. But safety was an illusion here. The deeper they moved, the more treacherous the terrain became. Hidden sinkholes swallowed soldiers whole, their arms reaching out in vain as they disappeared beneath the earth. Threll himself stumbled, his exosuit servos failing under the weight of the mud. He fell to his knees, the once proud commander now on the brink of collapse. The humans were closing in, but even they were secondary to the swamp's wrath. His legs were slowly sinking, the mud pulling him down, inch by inch. Gasping for air, he looked around one last time, his eyes wide with disbelief. The technology he had once trusted to protect him was useless here. The swamp, with its ancient, primal power, was winning. In the distance, he saw Jack and Henry watching, their expressions grim but resolute. With a final surge of effort, Threll tried to stand, but the earth clung to him like a living thing. His arms flailed, his voice a choked gurgle as the mud swallowed him whole. The swamp had claimed him. Jack lowered his shotgun and turned to Henry. "That's the last of them," he said quietly, though the weight of the battle still hung heavy in the air. "Swamp don't let go easy," Henry replied, watching the murky waters ripple. "Not when it's got a hold of you." The two men stood there for a moment longer, then turned and melted back into the fog. The swamp returned to its eternal stillness, silent and victorious, as though the Clarens had never been there at all.